Hello, Jerry here, and welcome to this series on Old Testament history, beginning with Solomon and progressing through the story of the split of God's people into Israel and Judah, and then through the rest of the Old Testament. Now, the life of Solomon deserves to be told in its fullness, but I'm not going to do that here. We remember that God was pleased when Solomon, given the chance to ask for anything, requested wisdom rather than wealth or power or any other thing. For many years, Solomon walked faithfully with the Lord, writing most of the book of Proverbs and building the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. Under Solomon's leadership, the Jewish kingdom reached its absolute zenith in glory and wealth, in international influence, which makes it all the more tragic and ironic that this same Solomon set in motion the catastrophic slide backward into Canaanite paganism. His compromises would eventually split the nation of Israel into two and lead to captivity by foreign powers. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered and taken captive by the Assyrians in 722 BC. The southern kingdom of Judah fell to Babylon through three devastating sieges of Jerusalem in 605, 597, and 586. After Solomon's reign, God would raise up prophet after prophet to address his people during their long, tragic slide toward these captivities. So understanding Solomon's fall is essential to understanding why God sent so many prophets. Let's look briefly at how this collapse began. 1 Kings 11. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Sometimes we simply don't believe God knows what he's talking about. Solomon was called the wise. Did he actually think he was the exception to this clear command? And if he did think that way, we should remember the New Testament warning about us assuming we're somehow exempt from temptation. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Solomon was exceptional. He had been granted a supernatural gift of wisdom. But no matter how great someone's gifts from God may be, those gifts don't make them exceptions to God's moral and spiritual laws that govern all of life. Notice 1 Kings 11:4. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. For a long time, Solomon successfully resisted the pagan influence of his wives. When they asked for this or that, a small altar here, a single priest for their cult over there, he must have consistently refused. Imagine the pressure. These women had direct access to the king's ear, and you can be certain their relatives and pagan priests were coaching them on what favors to request. But Solomon ultimately proved he was not the exception to God's command. I suppose that's one of our consolations as we grow older. Yes, we're aging, but at least we should be growing wiser. Tragically, Solomon's wisdom went the other direction until his wisdom failed him. He began to lavishly sponsor pagan cults. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. Solomon had cultivated a forest of temptation around him through his harem. Once he accommodated one wife's request, it was like a dam breaking. Verse 8 says he sponsored the gods for all his foreign wives, and that's 700 wives. The floodgates were wide open. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you, and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." Now verse 12 is truly amazing. God was very merciful to Solomon for the sake of David, and will implement this judgment after Solomon dies. In other words, Solomon, the cause of all this disaster, would not have to experience any of the terrible results. That's a huge gift of mercy by God to Solomon for the sake of his late father David. Solomon carried with him that knowledge that his kingdom would be judged and torn apart, and in this time he probably wrote the book of Ecclesiastes as he came to see the vanity of all his life's pursuits. The fall of Solomon was like the first domino in a long chain that would eventually topple into the captivities of both Israel and Judah. Think about Solomon's legacy for a moment. To us, looking back through thousands of years of history, Solomon appears as a great and wise man, the builder of the temple, the author of Proverbs, or most of it, the king who brought national success and prosperity. But how do you suppose the faithful people who lived in the centuries following Solomon looked back on him? Those who suffered through devastating political divisions, who endured ungodly kings ruling over them, who were dragged into exile into foreign lands, who faced the heartbreaking work of rebuilding the temple and city walls after Babylon destroyed them. How do you think they viewed Solomon? All that misery, all that divine judgment began with Solomon's tragic turning away from God. Solomon forfeited the privilege of being that uniquely wise and holy king devoted to the Lord. Instead, he fell in line with the other powerful rulers of his day, accumulating a massive harem and embracing religious pluralism to accommodate to the diversity of his household. Solomon's choices would create the conditions that made necessary a whole succession of prophets, as we'll see throughout this series. Now here's what's so sobering about Solomon's story. The Lord did not give him vague, ambiguous warnings about being careful during his reign. God had clearly taught the Jewish people not to intermarry with pagan nations, specifically explaining the disastrous outcome that would follow. He told them exactly what would happen. Even more remarkably, at the very height of Solomon's power and success, at a time when we might think he needed no advice whatsoever, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time. Now notice how specific and vivid God's warning was. When Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, and had achieved all he had desired to do, the Lord appeared to him a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, "I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple, which you have built, by putting my name there forever. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and I will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who will pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshipping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. Again, let me emphasize that this communication from the Lord came at the height of Solomon's greatness, fresh from that great spiritual victory of building the temple and all these achievements. But oh, how specific and vivid are those warnings. God even had Solomon imagine future travelers shaking their heads over the smoking ruins of Jerusalem, asking each other why such devastation had occurred. All because the people had pursued other gods. Yet, even after receiving this incredibly clear and detailed warning, Solomon still turned to pursue other gods. We have this entire Bible filled with memorable stories, both joyful and tragic, showing us how God blesses those who are faithful and obedient, and how he disciplines and judges those who are not. Story after story, with such vivid specificity and detail. We see throughout Scripture how much God treasures biblical wisdom. It should be our golden treasure. But we also see how intensely he hates idolatry and spiritual compromise. And yet, even with all these examples before us, like Solomon, sometimes we still set aside faith and choose a worldly path. We think somehow we'll be the exception. We'll convince ourselves that the warnings don't really apply to our specific situation. As we continue this series on Old Testament history and the prophets in the weeks ahead, we'll see how God persistently sent his messengers to call his people back to faithfulness. We'll discover how relevant their words remain for us today, because the God who spoke through them is the same God we serve, and the sinful impulses within humanity then are the same we struggle with today. Now, next time, Lord willing, we'll see the split of God's people into Judah and Israel, and the first two kings, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. How will they rule after Solomon? Like early Solomon for the Lord, or late Solomon, stuck in paganism? Thanks very much.